Hi, my name is Josh McLawhorn. I'm the director of Unfiltered, the Truth About Oysters. I was born in Tallahassee, Florida in the United States, and that's where I live currently. Unfiltered, the Truth About Oysters was filmed in various different places within the United States, but primarily a coast close to Tallahassee called Apalachicola Bay. The film was also filmed in South Florida, down near Longboat Key, Sarasota Bay, as well as New York City and Chesapeake Bay, which is near Maryland and Virginia and those states. So our inspirations for the film really came from the fact that Apalachicola Bay had been declining for a very long time. At one point, it produced almost 90% of Florida's oysters, and at its peak, up to 15% of the United States oyster supply. So this one very small bay in Florida was exporting oysters all around the country, and they were highly sought after. I personally grew up eating those oysters and swimming in those waters, and over the course of my lifetime, I saw the decline in the bay from this abundant natural resource to a place where there were all kinds of limits and restrictions, and eventually the state of Florida actually closed the bay to wild harvest. So at the time of recording this video, there are no wild oysters coming out of Apalachicola Bay. It's entirely closed to fishing. So the producer, Chucha Barber, and I decided that this was an important story to tell. It was local to where we live, and as we started to research more, we realized that Apalachicola Bay was not the only bay that produced oysters that was suffering. We realized that oyster reefs all around the world, in other continents, South America, Central America, the Caribbean, Europe, Africa, Asia, all of these places are seeing oyster reefs collapse, and it's all for the same reasons. It's for human development, it's habitat destruction, it's an overload of pollution, it's too many demands on fresh water. And Florida is a very large peninsula, and we have a lot of coastline. And Florida has the potential to restore oysters and create a model that can be used in other places in the world. So our inspiration for creating Unfiltered, the Truth About Oysters was not only to tell this local story about the decline of Apalachicola Bay, but also really to inspire people and governments to take oyster reef restoration seriously and to realize how important it is to a healthy ecosystem and all of the things that we enjoy. The next question is, how was the production and what is it like to film in your country? Our production took place over 4 years, from pre-production, the initial stages of determining what story we were going to tell, where the story was going to take place, and our production actually started before COVID, before the global pandemic, and went through the global pandemic and ended earlier this year. So obviously, it was very challenging filming during the pandemic. We didn't film very much. We had done several shoots before the pandemic began, and when the pandemic set in, everyone was on lockdown, and then even for a long time after things started opening back up, the people we needed to interview were not comfortable with a film crew showing up to their location and having close contact with them and anything like that. So production slowed down quite a bit throughout the pandemic, but we stuck with it and we finished the film and wound up with a story that was different than the one we initially wanted to tell, but we think is just as strong. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit. The initial story, one of the first things we did in pre-production was we read a book called History on the Half Shell, it was called The Big Oyster, History on the Half Shell. And it's a book by Mark Kurlansky, who is a well-known American nonfiction writer. He writes about marine resources and ocean life. And the book is all about how New York City, a long time ago, used to pretty much sustain itself food-wise on oysters. and how oysters were this, plentiful food resource, and how over time, as New York became more developed, they started destroying their habitat, their environment. They were pouring raw sewage into the rivers, and that was going out into the oyster reefs. Oysters, as filter feeders, they're gonna take up any pollution that is in the water. And so naturally people started getting sick, and eventually it got to the point where oysters in and around New York City were not able to be eaten without you becoming very, very sick. And to this day, that's the case. And so a big part of our story was going to take place in New York. And ultimately, because of the restrictions imposed upon us by the pandemic, we decided to make our story much more local, and we wound up focusing much more on what's happening here in Florida, because there's a lot happening in Florida regarding the destruction of reefs as well as reef restoration. To answer a little bit about what it's like to film in our country, which is the United States, as it's well known, the United States has a very large television and film industry, and so people are, for the most part, used to seeing cameras around. So from the perspective of familiarity with filming and things like that, it was very easy. We had a lot of people who were interviewed who had been interviewed before. They were comfortable being on camera, and overall, filming in the United States is pretty easy. Depending on where you are, you have to go through a lot of different hoops and hurdles. Like, for example, filming in Los Angeles, you need a permit to film on location. There are unions in play. There are a lot of things like that. Here in Florida, not so much. As long as you have permission to film on the property, logistically, there's not much more that you need other than permission. So in our case, filming was about what we expected it to be. The next question is, for you, what is the main role of cinema for society? As a person who loves to watch movies, and particularly documentaries, film for me is a way of learning. I like to read books too, but the old saying goes, a picture says 1,000 words, and film is, 24 pictures per second, so that's 24,000 words every second, and of course films are, often an hour long or longer. So film is, for me, an opportunity to learn and to teach. We hope that this film, Unfiltered, The Truth About Oysters, teaches people about oysters, about ecology, about estuaries, about reef restoration, about the dynamics of how estuaries contribute to an overall ecosystem. As far as narrative film, I think narrative film also has the same ability to inspire people that documentary does. Very often the role of narrative film is more for entertainment, but there are plenty of narrative films that, at the very least, provoke the kind of thoughts that would lead to societal change, and hopefully societal change for the better. So the role of cinema in society, I think, is to communicate first. It's a way for people who create films to share ideas, information, emotions with the audience who watches those films. The next question is, in an age of streamings, metaverses, and artificial intelligence, how do you see the future of cinema? I think that it has never been easier to make a film than it is today. Whereas in the past, cameras were very large and cumbersome by necessity. You had film reels, you had all the challenges and limitations of working with film. Now, cinematic image quality can be captured on smartphones. It can be captured on mirrorless cameras. The fundamentals of film will always apply, but the tools become less expensive, and higher quality all the time. So I think that streaming is an amazing opportunity for filmmakers who may not have the largest budget, like our film, to be able to get to audiences who might otherwise not see them. The metaverse is exciting to watch. I personally have not spent much time focusing on the metaverse, but I have no doubt that virtual reality, augmented reality will become a new form of media in the future, just like we watch television and film, read books, see plays. I'm confident that VR is going to be a big thing in the future. And I think that films and content will be exploding in that realm. As for artificial intelligence, right now it seems like it's a tool to be used for filmmaking, whether it's for scripting, whether it's for certain post-processing, post-production things. I know that technology will only become more advanced as well. Hopefully it doesn't get out of control. I know that there is a lot of threat to certain jobs and roles in the filmmaking industry, that artificial intelligence, may replace those jobs. I hope that as artificial intelligence increases, it doesn't shrink the pool of people who works on a film, because I think collaboration between human beings is one of the most beautiful and profound things that comes out of filmmaking. So I hope that artificial intelligence increases that collaboration rather than eliminating people and getting them away from the table and away from the discussion. The next question is, for independent filmmakers, do you think the hybrid model, screening in theaters, streaming, and online festivals, is bringing more benefits or losses? I kind of echo my answer to the last question. I think that screenings in person are the gold standard because it enables people to meet and to talk and to have those small conversations, which are often hard to have in a chat or through email or in any sort of digital way. At the same time, streaming enables people in very different geographic areas to collaborate, whereas they otherwise might not. International travel is obviously very expensive. It can cost thousands of dollars to get, anywhere from the United States, and I imagine it costs a similar amount to get to the United States from other countries. So the ability to stream and have online and digital screenings is in many cases the only way that audiences from different places in the world are able to see each other's work. So I hope that online and virtual screenings do not completely replace in-person film festivals, but I do think that there's value to all of it. The next question is, do you have any new work in development that you would like to share? Currently, I'm working on several different documentaries, but one that I would like to talk about is, the working title is Liberata. It's the story about an Italian woman in Nazi-occupied Italy during World War II. This is a true story. After Italy ousted their fascist dictator Benito Mussolini late in the war in 1943, the armed forces of Nazi Germany invaded Italy from the north as the Allied nations were liberating it essentially from the south. And there was a battle line right across southern Italy. And the woman in the story, her name is Liberata. She lived in a very small mountain town in a place called Abruzzo. And there were escaped prisoners of war, Americans, Canadians, Australians, English, wandering the Italian countryside. They had escaped POW camps in northern Italy and were trying to get to freedom to meet back up with the Allied forces in the south. this woman hid the POWs in caves in the mountains that were only known to the locals, hid them from the Nazi soldiers who were trying to recapture these POWs. And she worked with, we're not sure, we're still uncovering a lot of this, but she may have worked with the Italian mafia to smuggle these escaped POWs across the front lines and get them back to the Allied forces. So I just got back 2 weeks ago from filming in Italy for that documentary, and we hope that that will be done within the next year and a half maybe, and it will be a story that talks about that period of Italian history, World War II, post-armistice, Nazi occupation, the liberation of Rome. It'll talk about all those personal stories of success, but also of failure. Of the 50,000 POWs that escaped from POW camps in Italy, more than half of them were recaptured, and in many cases re-imprisoned, executed. So the story that we're telling is of two men who were able to get back to safety, but in the context of the whole thing, their story was not a common one. So as far as new work in development that I'd like to share, that's definitely one. Extra question: if you would like to add more information and or things not covered in the questions, feel free to use 5 minutes to develop lines on the topics you would like to share. Well, first, I just want to thank the T.I.F.A International Film Festival for selecting us and for screening our film and for the Best Editing Award and for the Societal Impact Award. We are so honored by that. We really are. We embarked on making this film because we wanted to communicate that there is this urgent environmental crisis which is happening, which is oyster reefs around the world collapsing. Oyster reefs are essentially giant water filtration plants. They clean water all the time. That's all they do. One adult oyster filters up to 50 gallons of seawater in a day. It's incredible to think about how much water is filtered by an organism that's this big. And a reef has millions of oysters. And so if these reefs go away, we are losing a tremendous water cleaning ability in our coastal communities. And we're going to start to see more toxic algae blooms. We're going to start to see fish dying off. We're going to see organisms that are higher in the food chain start to die off too. And we depend on fish and crustaceans and mollusks for a lot of our food across the world. So oysters, even though they're not the most exciting species, they are one of the most important for our oceans. So I'm very grateful, and our whole team is grateful that your festival selected our film. We're grateful for the awards and recognition that the film has earned in your festival. And we hope your audience enjoyed it and continues to enjoy it. And we just thank you very much, and we look forward to potentially bringing future films to your festival. Thank you.